Good morning,
Hey,
Stephen.
it must be time for another Feuer tip.
It certainly is. It's Wednesday. Here we are again.
Nice. And it's a
Did you have a
beautiful
good
day
week?
here in Chapel Hill. I've got my window open, so maybe we'll get some bird song in the recording.
I loved that. I did watch last week's again, and the birds were a nice addition. It's sunny here too, but my windows are closed, so no birds.
Yeah.
Did you have a good week?
Oh, I love the springtime. It's just amazing. The lush green colors, everything just bursting out. And the more you spend time outdoors, I hope everybody does spend at least some time, but the more you spend time outdoors and actually just look around at what's going on in the world, oh, it's just so beautiful and amazing.
Yes. I had a bit of a rough week. I had my first dose of the vaccine, so I'm glad that was done, but it was rough. First dose, first couple of days, fever and sore arm. But it's done. Oh, and there's your dog.
I think I might have to get rid of my dog. Moonbeam, chill. Okay.
So you've got a tip for us today.
I do have a tip, and I think that in this tip, I'm going to have my friends who are attending do some of the work. So give me some feedback. I'll show you some code. And in fact, I think I'll make this kind of like the standard mode of operation for these tips, because why should I do all the work? So what I want to do is talk about how not to handle DML errors. So why don't you go ahead and share my code? This is a program that I was working on, or a variation of it that I was working on about a month ago. And it was really, really interesting. And I thought I'd share it with all of you to see about what you thought of it, and also then where we might want to go with it. So here's a procedure that's full of DML, data management language statements, which we usually interpret as insert, updates, deletes, but actually they include selects as well. Selects are DML statements. The manipulation is simply getting it. But mostly for DML, we mean non-query DML inserts, updates, and deletes. So I pass in the order and a set of lines that I'm going to put in for the order, line items. I've got a message error declaration of a string, and I've got an exception declaration. Okay, cool. We don't see too many exceptions, user-defined exceptions declared in our code. Let's take a look at the code. So let's see. First of all, I've got a nested block. I'm going to update my orders, set the status to 2 for whatever reason for that order ID. And if anything goes wrong, I'm going to trap the error, set the message string saying, I tried to change the status, it didn't work. And then I'm going to raise the DML exception. Okay. Then we keep going. In other words, if we didn't have a problem here, we keep going. And then I've got a loop for each one of my line items, insert into the line items table. And again, if anything went wrong with that specific line item, set the message raise error DML. Okay, and that will also stop the loop from continuing. Then in the exception section, let's move the next version away a little bit. In my exception section, I trap for my DML exception, roll back any changes that might have been made. So for example, if this change was made successfully, but then one of these failed, I want to roll them all back. And then I'm going to raise an application error and send that message back to the calling program, to the calling block, and maybe to the user eventually. If anything else went wrong, again, I'll roll back and then say, well, this is an unknown error, and it occurred after the last setting of this message. So there's my code. And my question to my friends out there is, what do you think? Any thoughts about what could be improved or changed about this code? What do you think is wrong with it?
So let's give them a chance. Remember, there's a little bit of a delay.
Okay. So what is wrong with this code? Would you write code like this? And if not, what do you think it should look like instead? It's a quiet group today.
It's quiet. They're thinking.
Oh, there we go.
We've got Niels.
So one point that Niels makes is that, well, change the for loop to a bulk collect. So absolutely, this is clearly, whenever you see a for loop or any kind of loop that has row by row DML inside of it, the first thing you should think of in terms of performance is switching it to a for all based on the array. And then all of this could be replaced with a single insert under a for all statement. You wouldn't have a begin end. And actually, none of that, the rest of that would have to change, I think. But that's right. From the standpoint of performance, that is definitely the way to go. But I want to talk about the error handling. What else? Let's see. Too generic catch of errors. So Stacy says it's too generic a catch of errors. So let's go down there. Now, what's interesting, one of the things I liked about this piece of code is that, first of all, the person knew about defining your own exceptions, which a lot of us don't know about. So it's pretty cool to take advantage of that feature. They're aware that when errors are raised by DML, you really want to deal with it. You don't want to just ignore them. So I really like that attention to detail. They want to keep track of where the error went, where it occurred, like which one failed. And they actually did break out DML errors from other errors. So I'm not sure, Stacy, if you meant this is very generic or this is very generic. It's true. It's pretty generic. Yeah. What else? Aren't the bottom two exceptions redundant? Well, they look awfully redundant, Monty. Yes, they both do a rollback. They both do a raise application error. The only difference is that this one is a reminder that hey, we don't really know what happened. We don't know what went wrong. It wasn't, I guess, in one of the DML statements, it's not clear where it could have turned out. In the original program, there might have been lots more opportunities. But you're right, I'd say in this case, they're pretty redundant. Anything else?
So I agree that the developer was obviously very conscious of exceptions being raised and wanted to make sure they're being caught. They aren't being logged anywhere. Maybe it would be useful.
Right. So we're just raising the application error back out. There's no error logging, so there's no persistent memory of what went wrong and how we might go about fixing it. Yep. But it seems to me, I'm surprised that I'm not hearing more from some of you that also, while I like conceptually that they were paying attention to the situation, the errors they might deal with, the way they went about it was just like not the way to go. There is no added value to doing this. No added value whatsoever. So first of all, the only reason you might want to have a nested block with its own exception section to narrow the propagation of the exception is you might say, well, I want to record that this went wrong, but I want to continue. But if every time in my nested block, I trap the error, set my error message, and then raise an exception, in other words, skip the rest of this, that's just the same behavior as not having this at all. So for example, here's the approach I think would make a lot more sense to make. I put in some calls to logger just to show that, yes, as you pointed out, Michelle, we should log the error, not just do a raise application error. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. I took out all the nested blocks. So now I update my order set status equal to 2. If something goes wrong, this immediately stops the block from continuing. This never execute. I come down here into one others, and I log the error. Now, what the person who's writing this code might have said, well, yeah, but then I don't know which one failed. Was it the update? Was it the insert? Which one was causing the problem? So now my question to all of you is that really true? Do we really need to set a message like that to say, here's where we got, this is the one that caused the error? Is there another way to find out which update statement called the error? While you're thinking about that, I've got another comment from Stacy. We can improve by using built-in errors for primary keys, etc., and get more detailed instead of just when others. Yes. So I think what you're talking about, Stacy, is actually saying when this error, when that error, and give them names if they don't have names, and actually have different exceptions for different errors. Great point, and I want to come back to that one. Angel says, maybe move the loop below the update where there's no exception, then update the exception is not useful. The loop is below the update now. Okay, yeah, but
I'm pretty sure that all of these comments, Stephen, came in before you showed your new version. So they're still relating to improving your first version. Yeah.
So, and again, the question I have for you right now is, if I take out those L message errors, that was basically the user was saying, I got this far, I got this far, I got this far. If I remove that, how do I find out which DML statement failed or where the error came from? So the answer to that is, in case you don't know about it, DBMS utility format error backtrace. So the backtrace function, and here let's pull up a file that surely has that in it, since I have files with almost anything I can imagine in it. So the DBMS utility format error backtrace function traces back to the line number on which the error is raised. So in this case, in the code that was originally written, first of all, another big problem with this passing back the message error is it doesn't pass any information about the actual error. So probably the original code had something like this. Pass back the error number. But even that is just not enough. What you really want to do is make sure that you always record the error backtrace. Now, this is the wrong way to record it. We're just passing it back out. But my point is that if you ever find yourself writing code like set the status code to 1, then 2, then 3 as I move through my program, I've done this before, so I know how far I got. You can always use the backtrace to backtrace back to the line in which the error was raised. And in fact, the other problem with this approach is by doing a re-raise, I completely lose the actual original line number. So for example, if there were multiple DML statements in here, I wouldn't know which one of them were. I guess you'd have a separate block for each one, but not the way to go. So instead, what I'm going to do here is just have my DML statements, rely on the built-in PL SQL framework to do as much of the work for me as possible, and in this case, also take advantage of my predefined error logging utility. Log error calls DBMS utility format error backtrace. It calls format error call stack. It calls format call stack, and it calls format error stack. All that information is automatically retrieved by a call to loggers log error procedure and pretty much any other generic error logging mechanism you use. So you simply do not have to code that for yourself. All right, let's see what other comments have come up.
Yeah.
So, yep, Logger can.
So just to say that Stacy mentioned that as well, that Logger will capture the error stack too.
Mm-hmm. And Piet points out that one of the other thing that we're missing in that original piece of code, let's go back up to it, is that when I'm logging this information like the message error, what it's lacking is the local information, like what's the value of the order, which order is causing the problem, which line. In fact, even in here, we don't even keep track of which line item it was. Just, hey, it failed. So we lost that local information. Very good. And Nils is responding that to Stephanie that the other is reached if the collection P lines is not initialized.
So this is still back to your original version. Stefan said that the last when others would never be called in your original, and this was Neil's response to it.
Yeah, so that's right. If this was a nested table or a V array that was not initialized, this would immediately cause a failure right here. So that's true. So Nils did identify one error that could be raised, and of course, it's hard to know in advance all the different possible kinds of errors that would be raised. Not a lot of added value here to separate them out, but I like the idea. Now, one of you mentioned, well, why not have separate exceptions for each one of the DML errors? And now I have a question for all of you. I would say that it's pretty clearly generally accepted recommended practice. I won't use best practice because nobody likes that term anymore. To separate out or handle each exception separately when you know the exception could be raised. This is particularly, I think, the pattern in Java code. I'm not sure about JavaScript. So you can actually identify the exceptions that are going to be raised and treat them. How many of you actually separate out when others, and let's say the foreign key constraint violation and a check constraint violation, and actually have 5 or 6 or whatever number of different when clauses for all those variations? I've got to say that for me, I generally don't do that, partly because I'm lazy. I'd have to look up what the exceptions might be. Partly because in most cases, it's all going to be the same anyway. I'm going to log it and either raise or keep going. So do any of you have experience with breaking them out? And maybe you can share what has been the value, the added value for you. And here's a comment from Hemant while you're thinking about that. Would you want to put user English error messages that users can understand when they read the logs instead of, for example, insert of new order failed? So Hemant, that's great. I mean, I think in general, when you're figuring out what message to store in your error log, and also probably more importantly, what message to send back to the user, you want to think about getting all the local stack, the local application state, basically local variables, parameter values, and you want to store them. And as well, of course, the more information you can give in the message, the better. Right? You're going to come, you or somebody else is going to come along later and say, what went wrong? What was the error? And the more you can lay that out in plain English or plain whatever your language is, the better, for sure. Okay, so I don't see any takers.
Back to your question on the breaking out the different types of constraint exceptions that could be raised. I wonder if when you were talking about what not to put in your exception block last week, was it last week or a couple of weeks ago?
Last week.
A sort of bad practice of actually putting application logic in there, maybe some insert statements or whatever. So maybe if somebody is doing that as a practice, they'd want to know, well, if it's a unique constraint violation, then do this. If it's a no data found, then do an insert. If it's so maybe that would be the case. And I know that you would say that's not a good practice, but maybe that's when that
No,
might
no,
be.
no. I don't think that's a violation of what I was saying last week. And I think, in fact, you're right. So I think the only real reason to break out those different when clauses for different errors if you had a different action to take. So dupe valid index was the error, and you could say, well, okay, I know that this means that the name is duplicated. So I'm going to add a 1, 2, 3, or I've got a little loop to generate a unique name and then try again. That sort of thing. That would be the justification. Yes.
Right.
But it wouldn't make sense to break it out simply to say, now get the SQL error message and the SQL backtrace, because that'll give you all that information anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And Stacy says, no data found. I use that one for select intos, specifically expecting certain control data to be available in a given app. Absolutely right, Stacy. So for select intos, you have too many rows and no data found. And we will often code for those specifically because the behavior for those can be very different. No data found is a really special case because I think in many cases, no data found is not even an error. It's just a data condition. So you want to treat it almost as a conditional thing. We did talk about that a bit last week. And Nils says, most of the time, I only make a difference between others and user-defined exceptions. Another really good way to distinguish. If I actually went out of my way to create a user-defined exception, usually what that means is, in fact, you can stop sharing for a moment. So usually what it means if you have a user-defined exception is that you have an exception that's application-specific. And if it's application-specific, like balance too low, balance can't be negative, whatever, you will want to trap those separately because you'll have a very specific application-related message to send to the user about that. EDML, the DML exception, probably the name itself was a really good indicator that's not quite the best way to do it because it's a totally generic name. So you're not really getting any specific value out of that. Okay, so let's see. That's about 15 minutes. That's a good amount of time for a tip. So I'd say we'll keep checking for comments coming in. But in the meantime, let's do a couple of things. I've got 2 show and tells I want to do this week. If any of you were on last week, I introduced a new show and tell, which is pick a book off my bookshelf and talk about it. And last week,
not one of your books, not one of
my books
that you've authored.
Last week it was Out on a Limb by Ben Killam about rehabilitating black bears, and a truly amazing story that reminds us how many other creatures are intelligent and sentient, have strong sense of values, etc. Okay, so I'm not going to delve into nature again. I'll come back to that, I'm sure. What I wanted to do is share one of my favorite science fiction fantasy books. So if you're not into science fiction fantasy, you can just forget about it. But this is Robin Hobb, Assassin's Apprentice. I know it's kind of got a brutal name to it, and there's certainly some brutal elements to the book, but it blew me away. Now, I got to tell you, there's a funny story behind this book. I think this particular book itself. I was in Puerto Rico. We were taking a vacation for a couple of weeks, and we were washing our clothing at a laundromat nearby. We have a house down there that we would stay in, but it doesn't have a laundry. Anyway, so we're washing the laundry, and often they have a little set of books that you can pick from to read or take with you. And I came across this book, and it turned out to be one of the most favorite books of my life, partly because it follows a pattern that is my favorite kind of fiction, which is a first-person narrative. So it's told from the perspective of a person, and you only experience what that person experienced. I think that's one of the most powerful ways to tell a story, and it's really hard to do, and she does it so well. And the other thing I love about the story, and it actually goes on, I don't know if it will scare you or delight you, but this is the first of a what do they call it? A trio?
Trilogy?
A trilogy, but it's the first of 3 trilogies that are all linked together. So it's actually a total of 9 books in this one stream of stories. And she has other trilogies that are in parallel, and they meet up like 9 books down. And the other thing I just love
always amazed at how authors can tie those stories together, sort of 9, imagine 12.
And in this one in particular, every single thing you read has significance later on. It's really, really something. So that's
like the Harry Potter series. Like the Harry Potter series.
Harry Potter's okay. I mean, to me, the writing, Robin Hobb's writing is just incredible. It's really, really something. Anyway, so check that out if you're inclined in that direction. The other thing I wanted to talk about today was washing your clothing. So here's something called Earth Breeze. fragrance-free eco sheets. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate consuming single-use plastic, something you can only use once and then gets thrown away. Oh, we are killing our planet. So I try to reuse every piece of plastic I get, but even better is to avoid buying them. And one of the worst things I do is buy these enormous jugs of laundry detergent. I mean, I could buy small jugs, but then I'd buy 10. One big one is better, right? I've been doing that for years and going to Costco and getting lugging these things home. Terrible amount of plastic. And it turns out that there are a number of options now that you can buy that there are these little sheets that you just drop into the laundry. It has all the soap inside of it and no more plastic bottles at all. So earthbreeze.com is one you can go to. There's also true-earth.com, I believe it is.
It's so funny that you're talking about this today because I actually just got my True Earth product delivered yesterday. I haven't tried it yet, but it looks really interesting.
Yeah.
At our grocery stores, though, they have a whole refill sort of service. So you just buy the plastic jug once and you take it back and you get it refilled time and time again. I'd be interested to see sort of overall which is the better solution for the environment.
Well, I mean, zero waste refill stores are fantastic. I don't think we have any around here, which is surprising, given how progressive this part of North Carolina is, because then at least you're reusing those containers and you're not like, this does get shipped to me, even though there's no plastic in here at all. Anyway, it's actually increasingly possible to avoid using new plastic in your lives. And I encourage you to find every possible way to do it. Use our app to help you figure it out, evry.app. The Every app will help. And now I'm going to go back. I'm going to jump back because Nils had another comment. And feel free to comment on any of those things as well. In my code, there are mainly two different exceptions, e-abort and e-assertion. And that's interesting. So I assume that your e-assertion has to do with asserting that assumptions are true, Nils. And e-abort, maybe if you want to put in some comments about what those, the significance of those in your apps, that'd be great. Or we can even unmute you. And I think, right? And you could talk.
No, we'd have to have him come on. So we'll get ready for that next time to do that. Okay.
So, and in fact, I will talk about assertions in the future. I'm actually working on my latest version of an assertion package now, and they're really nice ways to validate your assumptions and write cleaner code. And so I think what Nils is probably doing is in his assertion API, he raises a special error that it was an assertion failure, and then he can trap for that separately. Okay, so that covers my tip. We had a lot of good comments. Does anybody else have any other things they'd like to say about error handling in DML or EarthBreeze or science fiction fantasy books? You can even offer your own favorite books.
Mm-hmm. And your book, your copy is very dog-eared. Is that because that's the way you found it in Puerto Rico, or just because?
Well, yes, it was quite
so much time with it
at that point. But I got to say that what you see in my bookcase back there are pretty much all my totally favorite books over the years. I've gotten rid of hundreds of books when I moved to North Carolina, and I reread them shamelessly, absolutely shamelessly. Yeah. During the pandemic, when the library closed down at the beginning of the pandemic, we couldn't even do holds and pick them up, and I refused to use a Kindle, and I don't want to buy books. I went through my whole catalog of favorite books at least once.
Nice.
I guess. It's like eating comfort food, really. Okay.
I think it's time to pick a winner or the person that gets to choose. So just as a reminder to everyone, as you can see, Stephen is very passionate about the environment, about climate change. And one of the things that we do every week is we donate $25 to one of 3 different charities that Stephen has picked.
Before you show them, though, I nominate Stacy to pick this week.
See, great minds. I was going to pick Stacy also. You didn't give me executive powers.
I'm sorry.
We're very well aligned. So Stacy, I'm going to share my screen quickly. Stacy, if you aren't familiar with the 3 groups that we're working with, we are working with Sheldrick Wildlife Trust.
Save the elephants and the rhinos. Giraffes.
Earthwatch. And Kevin picked Earthwatch last week. And the Center for Biological Diversity. So if you want to take a few seconds and let us know in the comments who you would like us to donate this week.
Center for Biological Diversity does a lot of work around extinction and especially lawsuits to stop our government. I think it's focused just in the U.S. to stop removing Endangered Species Act protections and so on. Really, really valuable work that they do. And Earthwatch has a scientist, citizen collaboration efforts to expand the efforts or the reach of their scientific work around the planet. Well, Stacy might not be here anymore. There we go. Good stuff.
Well, she was here a minute ago, so I'm guessing she still is here.
Biological diversity. Okay.
There you go.
And thank you so much, Stacy. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I hope it was a useful tip, and thanks for your contributions and ideas. See you next week. Stay safe, stay masked, get vaccinated, please. And urge all your friends to get vaccinated. We will get through this. And for any of you who are maybe here from India or have friends and family in India, yes, I hope that things get better there fast. It's pretty horrible.
We actually do. We had, who did we have? Ganesh. At least Ganesh is here from India. So
Ganesh, I hope you're well and your family is well, and take care of yourself.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Take care.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.